Welcome, weary traveler. As you settle in for the evening, let your mind drift back through the folds of time. Leave behind the hum of electronics, the glow of modern lights, and the ceaseless ticking of today's world. Tonight, we journey softly into the ancient lands of Greece, a civilization both familiar and strange, both echoing with the footsteps of philosophers and whispering with forgotten rituals. Among the olive groves and marble temples, in the flickering torchlight of funerals long past, one question lingers in the hush of history. Why did the ancient Greeks place coins in the mouths of their dead? This quiet, curious custom, so seemingly small, opens a gentle doorway into the beliefs, fears, and rhythms of daily life in a world shaped by gods, myths, and the steady turn of the seasons. We will not rush. Instead, we will meander, slowly and peacefully, through the winding streets of ancient towns and sacred places. We'll meet artisans and poets, listen to hushed prayers at funerals, and watch, from a respectful distance, as coins, simple, circular, metallic tokens, are tucked beneath cold tongues for reasons that go far beyond payment. Over the course of 15 carefully guided segments, we'll explore not just the practice itself, but the world that gave it meaning, a world of heroes and humble potters, of silent tombs and bustling agoras, of golden myths and quiet human worries. So find a comfortable position. Let your breath slow. Let the weight of the day fall gently from your shoulders. And imagine yourself walking in the soft evening air of ancient Athens. The sun is dipping low, casting long shadows through stone colonnades. You are not in a hurry. There is only the rhythm of sandals on smooth stone, and the past, waiting patiently. Let us begin. Imagine yourself waking not in your modern bed, but upon a low wooden frame covered in straw and woolen blankets. The early morning light spills in through a small window high on the mud-plastered wall, diffused and pale. Roosters are already crowing outside. The house smells faintly of olive oil, burnt ashes, and warm earth. You live in a modest home in Athens, during the 5th century BCE, an era sometimes called the Golden Age, though for most people, life is simple, predictable, and tinged with hardship. Your home has an open central courtyard, which serves as the heart of daily life. The walls are made of clay brick, the roof of red tiles. It's quiet, save for the soft clatter of a pot being moved, the brushing of sandals, the gentle murmur of neighbors beginning their routines. Your family is not poor, but not rich either. You rise, wash your face with cool water poured from a ceramic jug, and eat a light breakfast, perhaps a piece of barley bread dipped in wine, or a handful of figures. Food is always seasonal, and always simple. Honey, cheese, olives, and fish are staples. Meat is rare, reserved for religious festivals. As you step out into the street, the sun is already warming the smooth stone beneath your feet. The agora, the central marketplace, is beginning to stir. Merchants are arranging their goods, amphorae filled with oil and wine, baskets of fruit, bolts of cloth. The air smells of baked bread, ripe grapes, and the occasional tang of animal dung. You pass by children playing with knucklebones in the dirt, women walking to the public fountain with clay jugs on their shoulders, and an old man reading aloud from a scroll to a small circle of listeners. Even in ordinary life, words and ideas fill the air like birdsong. In ancient Greece, time is not counted by hours but by the position of the sun and the rhythm of chores. You might be a potter, your hands thick with clay as you shape a crater, a mixing bowl for wine, or perhaps you're a small-scale farmer, tending olive trees and rows of barley just outside the city walls. Death is never far from daily life, but it's not something to be feared openly. Instead, it is folded gently into the fabric of existence, like the soft fray at the edge of a woven tunic. Shrines to household gods stand in many corners. Offerings are made regularly, bits of food, a few drops of wine. These gestures bind the living to the dead and to the divine. In the evenings, families gather to share food, stories, and sometimes quiet songs. Lamps are lit, shallow clay vessels filled with oil and a floating wick. Shadows flicker against the wall. Life slows. And perhaps, during moments of stillness, people think of ancestors, or whisper the name of someone recently gone. When someone dies, the rhythms change. Death is not private. It is communal, ritualistic, and always deliberate. The body is washed, anointed with oils, and prepared at home. Visitors arrive, bearing wreaths or jars of oil. There is crying, yes, but also recitation, song, and sacred observance. Everything has meaning. Everything follows the proper order. Even the placement of a single coin in the mouth of the deceased is done with intention, shaped by myth, law, and custom. You would have seen this before. Perhaps you stood silently as your grandmother's body was prepared. Perhaps you recall the weight of the coin, its worn edge, its dull shine in the lamplight. You didn't question why. It was simply the way of things. But now, as you lie back in the warmth of your small home, with the faint hum of cicadas in the background and the stars overhead, the question lingers softly: why the coin? Why place silver on the tongue of the departed? We will get there. But first, let us continue walking in their sandals. Let us understand the world that gave rise to this curious rite. In the days ahead, you'll come to see that a single coin can tell 100 stories. It buys passage. It honors tradition. It soothes the living. And it reveals the delicate balance between this world and the next. Now that we've walked quietly through the streets of daily Greek life, where the rhythms of chores and customs form the background of every day, it's time to linger beside one of the deeper mysteries, death, and what comes after it. In the ancient Greek world, the coin placed in the mouth of the deceased wasn't simply symbolic. It was a deeply embedded part of a cultural belief system surrounding the soul's journey after death, an invisible voyage across a dark, slow-moving river. To understand this journey, and the ferryman who guided it, we must drift not just into history, but into myth. Imagine yourself in a different kind of place now, not under the sunlit sky of Athens, but beneath the surface of the world itself. The ancient Greeks believed that when a person died, their soul left the body and began a journey downward, into the underworld, a realm known as Hades. It was not a place of fire or torment. It was shadowy, vast, and still. A place for all the dead, whether good or wicked. The soul, or psyche, was thought to resemble a vapor, an airy echo of the person who had once lived. Unlike travelers today, these souls needed help navigating their final destination. One figure stood at the threshold between the living and the dead, Charon, the ferryman of the underworld. He was imagined as an old, rough-featured boatman, draped in ragged robes, forever rowing across the river Akron, or in some stories, the river Styx. It was he who transported the dead from the world of the living into the silent lands beyond. But Charon did not offer his services freely. He demanded payment, a single coin, often called an obol, which had to be given directly to him. If no coin was presented, the soul was said to be left wandering the shores of the river for eternity, unable to cross, trapped between worlds. This is why the coin in the mouth mattered so deeply. It wasn't just ritual. It was a form of passage, a kind of ancient toll for the most important journey of all. The practice came to be known as Charon's obol, a term still used by historians and archaeologists today. And while there are slight regional variations in how it was practiced, the central idea remained the same: the dead needed a fare for the ferryman. The coin itself was usually small, often an obol, a silver coin equivalent to a fraction of a drachma. It might be gently placed in the mouth of the deceased, typically between the lips or under the tongue. In some regions, coins were placed over the eyes instead. In others, they were set in the hand or nearby in the grave. but the symbolism remained constant. It was a payment for safe passage. This belief can be traced through centuries of Greek literature and funerary practices. As early as the 5th century BCE, playwrights and poets reference the rite. In The Frogs by Aristophanes, Charon makes a brief appearance, ferrying the god Dionysus across the river. In Virgil's Aeneid, written much later in Rome but influenced by Greek traditions, Charon refuses to carry the unburied dead. Burial was everything. Without it, the dead could not move on. And without the coin, the journey itself stalled. Now, imagine attending a funeral in ancient Greece. You stand quietly among mourners as the body, wrapped in simple cloth, is placed upon a bier. Oil has been used to anoint the skin. Fresh flowers and wreaths are laid nearby. And before the mouth is covered, a coin is slipped in, small, circular, cool to the touch. It is done gently, with solemnity. Not everyone says why. They do not need to. They simply know that it must be done. These rituals were part of the Greek funerary triad, prothesis, the laying out of the body, ekphora, the funeral procession, and peridiapnon, the funerary feast. The placement of the coin often occurred during the prothesis, when family and friends paid their last respects. The body would lie in state for a day or more, surrounded by lamplight and quiet hymns. In wealthier homes, elaborate coins might be chosen, finely minted silver, sometimes with images of Athena or Apollo. For more modest families, any coin would do. The amount didn't matter. Only the gesture did. Over time, this rite became so common that even when coinage changed, from city to city, from silver to bronze, from Hellenistic designs to Roman, the belief in Charon's toll persisted. The dead still needed their fare, and the ferryman still waited at the shore. Today, archaeologists uncover graves throughout the ancient Greek world that hold coins tucked near the jaw or scattered across the chest, silent tokens from the living to the dead. In some cases, the coin remains lodged in the mouth, a final offering that defied the centuries. And so, what might seem at first like a superstition was, in fact, a rich expression of faith, duty, and care. The coin in the mouth was a promise: you will not walk the riverbank alone. But even as we begin to understand this practice, more questions ripple beneath its surface. Where exactly did these beliefs come from? Was there really a place called the underworld? Were Charon and Hades mere myths, or did people truly believe the dead kept moving after breath had left the body? To explore that, we must descend deeper into the realm of ancient burial customs, sacred geography, and the subtle echoes of the soul's journey. Because as much as this was a coin for Charon, it was also a message for the gods. The world of the ancient Greeks was not just made up of what the eye could see. Beneath the temples, the markets, and the hillsides rich with olive trees, there was another world, hidden, imagined, yet vividly present in every aspect of life, the underworld. To the Greeks, death was not an end, but a transition, sometimes feared, sometimes prepared for with careful ritual. And to understand why coins were placed in mouths, we must now turn to the landscape of that afterlife, as the Greeks imagined it, and how it shaped both their burial practices and their deepest hopes. Imagine yourself now standing at the mouth of a cave. It's dusk. The sun has just dipped behind the mountains, and a soft breeze stirs the tall grass. The cave before you is dark and still. It yawns open like the entrance to another world. And in the minds of many ancient Greeks, it was just that. Several locations throughout the Greek world were believed to be gateways to the underworld, physical places where the living world blurred into the realm of the dead. The most famous among them was Lake Avernus in Italy, near Cumae, adopted by the Greeks during their contact with the West. Another was the Necromantion of Ephora, a temple devoted to the practice of communicating with the dead. This temple stood on a hill near the river Akron in northwestern Greece, one of the rivers said to flow through the underworld. In these places, the veil was thought to be thinner. Pilgrims and priests entered to consult the spirits of the departed. Ceremonies were held. Incense was burned. And sometimes, coins were left behind, perhaps as tokens, perhaps as offerings, perhaps as payments to unseen forces. These sacred sites offer glimpses into how Greeks conceptualized the afterlife not just in myth, but in physical space. It wasn't a heaven high above or a fiery abyss below. It was close, earth-adjacent, enterable, reachable, if only under the right conditions. Archaeologists excavating such places have found layers of clues, oracle tablets, ceremonial vessels, and sometimes graves nearby containing coins precisely placed. In the ancient city of Poseidonia, now Paestum in Italy, tombs dating to the 4th century BCE have been found containing bronze coins placed delicately inside the mouths of the deceased. These discoveries aren't always spectacular. A coin, after all, is small. It tarnishes easily, hides in folds of cloth or between bones. But its placement, always in or near the mouth, or clasped in a hand, is what speaks volumes. These were not casual inclusions. They were precise, intentional, ritualistic. In the poetic and philosophical texts of the time, we also find evidence of a detailed and layered afterlife. According to the Orphic tradition, a set of mystical religious beliefs that flourished from the 6th century BCE onward, the soul's journey after death involved a series of trials, paths, and decisions. Followers of this tradition often buried their dead with thin gold tablets inscribed with guidance: turn left at the cypress tree. Do not drink from the river Lethe, but from the pool of memory. Coins were sometimes found in these burials too, serving not just as a fare, but as a passport, a form of ID, a tool for the soul's navigation. And so, death was not a void. It was a journey through a recognizable geography, across rivers, past gates, into judgment halls. The soul needed help. And the coin was a companion on that voyage. Even outside the mystic traditions, ordinary tombs often reflected this belief in a meaningful journey after death. Imagine entering a chambered tomb outside of Athens. Inside, you find a clay crater, some personal jewelry, perhaps a toy if the deceased was a child, and resting on what would have once been the lips or chin of the body, a coin, worn thin, darkened by time, but unmistakable. There are also puzzles. In some regions, we find no coins. In others, coins are found only in elite tombs. Was the practice universal, or tied to status, belief, or region? The answer remains, softly, unknown. It's worth noting that some coins found in tombs are of low denomination, while others are quite fine, silver tetradrachms, sometimes minted in places far from where they were buried. This tells us two things: that the coin itself did not need to be valuable in worldly terms, and that its selection may have had personal or symbolic meaning. A coin from one's homeland. A coin from a sacred city. A coin that had passed through generations. The archaeology of these tombs is gentle work. Each grave is a whisper. Coins are removed with care, catalogued, studied, and in some cases, returned. In doing so, researchers try to read a story that was never written down in full, only practiced quietly, consistently, over centuries. And while many rituals from the ancient world have faded, this one still lingers. Even today, in parts of Greece and beyond, families sometimes leave coins with their loved ones who have passed. A distant echo of Charon's toll, carried forward by memory more than doctrine. So as you lie in the soft folds of your blanket tonight, perhaps you can feel the hush of that other world, not fearful, but quiet. Imagine a single silver coin, placed with love and care. Imagine the stillness of the tomb, the ancient echo of sandals on the underworld stone shore. And just beyond that shoreline, the soft splash of a boat approaching. As we continue our slow descent through the beliefs and customs of ancient Greece, let us now step aside from caves and myth and return to something more grounded, more human. Let us turn to how people of different backgrounds, classes, and status approached the same inevitable end. Because while death was universal, the way it was prepared for and remembered could vary greatly depending on one's position in society. Imagine yourself once more walking through the streets of a Greek city. But this time, you follow two funeral processions. One is modest, quiet, unadorned, respectful. The other is elaborate, full of mourners, richly decorated, and followed by hired musicians. This contrast reveals not just wealth, but the priorities of remembrance. For the Greeks, death was a moment to be marked, not only for the sake of the departed, but for the sake of those left behind. It preserved a name. It acknowledged a life. And it reaffirmed one's place within the family, the community, and even the city. Let's begin with the ordinary citizen, the farmer, the craftsman, the mother of many children. For such individuals, burial customs were rooted in family traditions and neighborhood customs. The home was often the site of the prothesis, or laying out of the body, where relatives gathered, women wept aloud in ritual lament, and coins were quietly placed upon the body. Graves might be marked with a simple stele, a vertical stone bearing the name of the deceased, and perhaps an image carved in low relief. A young woman depicted reaching out to her mother. A boy shown with a beloved dog. These were not elaborate monuments, but personal ones, visual memories carved in stone. The coin placed in the mouth was likely a simple one. Its value did not lie in its metal, but in the continuity of belief. Even for those with very little, that small silver or bronze piece was an act of care, a final act of provision. But now, shift your attention to the burials of the elite, wealthy aristocrats, victorious generals, or prominent civic leaders. For them, funerals were opportunities to display prestige, piety, and permanence. Graves could be expansive, lined with marble, filled with imported pottery and ornate offerings. In Athens, wealthy families might erect tall funerary monuments along the roads leading into the city, visible reminders to passers-by of their enduring legacy. Coins found in these tombs were sometimes of exquisite quality, minted from silver or even electrum, bearing the marks of distant city-states. Some tombs contained multiple coins, sometimes placed not just in the mouth, but also in the hands or at the feet of the deceased. One particularly elaborate tomb near Corinth yielded a gold diadem, luxury pottery, and a delicately balanced obol tucked between the jaws of a skull. But even amidst this grandeur, the coin remained. Rich or poor, famed or forgotten, all required passage across the river of the dead. Charon did not discriminate. The wealthy, however, could afford more than safe passage. They could afford memory. And in the ancient Greek world, being remembered was a form of survival. To die and be forgotten was to vanish entirely. Orators would speak of the dead at public funerals, often for soldiers or benefactors. Statues might be erected. Poems might be composed. And family tombs, those of the very wealthy, might house generations, each one carefully named, their markers serving as both gravestone and genealogy. But this, too, was not without anxiety. For even the wealthiest Greeks feared the loss of remembrance. Philosophers wrote of the impermanence of honor, the fickleness of fame, and the uncertainty of legacy. In Plato's Phaedo, Socrates speaks calmly of the soul's journey after death, suggesting that virtue, not wealth, determines one's true fate beyond this life. In contrast, thinkers like the poet Simonides emphasized the need to inscribe names in stone, to make memory as permanent as possible, even if true eternity was elusive. What then of the slaves? The foreigners? The women whose names were never written? They too died. They too were buried. But often they left no mark, only shallow graves, reused coins, and the faintest trace of ritual. And yet, sometimes, even in these humble burials, the coin was there. A glimmer of humanity. A belief that no soul should be left behind. It's important to note that while the Greeks valued burial and memory, cremation was also common, especially during earlier centuries. Cremated remains were gathered in urns and buried with the same care, often alongside a coin. Even when the body vanished in flame, the journey beyond it remained. In this way, the Greeks lived with death, not in fear, but in constant negotiation. They prepared, remembered, and ritualized. And whether they walked in sandals stitched from simple leather or rode in chariots of bronze-trimmed wood, they all eventually arrived at the riverbank. The coin was their quiet declaration that they had lived, and that someone had loved them enough to place it there. And now, as we close this segment, imagine walking slowly along a path lined with ancient graves. The sun is low. The stones are weathered, their inscriptions faint. But here and there, a symbol remains, a worn carving of a hand holding a coin, a gentle nod toward Karen, and a soft reminder of a life that once was. In our next segment, we'll return to daily life, but this time from the perspective of a woman preparing for her own passing. Through her eyes, we'll witness the tenderness and tension of belief, the practicalities of funeral rites, and the quiet weight of placing a coin where the breath once passed. Imagine yourself not in the noisy center of Athens or beside the sea-swept tombs of warriors, but in a quiet village on the edge of Boeotia, nestled between rolling hills and olive groves. The houses are modest, mud brick walls, thatched roofs, small vegetable gardens in the back. Chickens cluck softly in the courtyards. A fig tree leans over the narrow road, its leaves rustling faintly in the breeze. In one of these homes lives a woman named Veronica. She is no longer young. Her hair, once the color of dark honey, has turned to silver. Her hands, shaped by decades of weaving and grinding grain, are veined and dry. She lives alone now. Her husband has long since passed, and her children have grown, married, and moved to other villages. Veronica is not afraid of death. Not exactly. But she feels it approaching, quietly, like the morning mist that creeps through the olive branches. Her breath is shallower these days. Her knees ache when she kneels. And sometimes, when she rises too quickly, the world sways around her like a boat. But she is not panicked. She is preparing. There is a small wooden box beneath her bed. Inside it, wrapped in soft cloth, lies a single silver coin. She has saved it for years, ever since her husband was placed upon the bier. His own coin gently slipped into his mouth by trembling fingers. She remembers that day with clarity, the quiet wailing of the women, the scent of rosemary and oil, the soft prayers murmured as the coin touched his lips. Veronica has kept this coin not because of superstition, but because of love. To die without it would mean, so she believes, wandering. And she has no desire to linger. She wants to cross. To reunite with her husband. To rest beside the river, with the journey behind her. Her house is filled with small preparations. A folded linen shroud, sewn by her own hand. A jar of oil for anointing. A wreath of dried laurel leaves, hung above the hearth. Each item is quiet, humble, but rich with meaning. And though no one speaks of it, her neighbors know. An older cousin checks on her daily. A neighbor's daughter leaves food by the door. Even the village priest has stopped by to offer blessings, soft words, warm eyes, and a nod toward the hidden box beneath her bed. When she feels the time has come, Veronica lights a lamp by her bedside. It is a small, clay vessel with a wick that drinks slowly from its olive oil reservoir. The light it gives off is low, flickering, golden. It casts gentle shadows across the room. She lies on her bed, wrapped in a light wool blanket. The night is cool, the crickets are singing, and the distant howl of a dog echoes over the hills. She places the coin near her lips and closes her eyes. Time passes. Perhaps it is hours. Perhaps it is days. Eventually, she is found still, peaceful, her features relaxed. The lamp has gone out. But the coin is there. Her cousin arranges the funeral. It is simple but proper. The women of the village gather to wash and prepare the body. They anoint her with oil, brush her hair, and place the coin firmly in her mouth. There is no discussion of whether it should be done. It is simply understood. A rite passed through countless generations. As the body is carried on the wooden bier through the village, people step outside their homes to bow their heads. Children are hushed. Birds flit among the rooftops. The procession moves slowly toward the burial ground at the edge of the village. A shallow grave has been dug near her husband's resting place. She is lowered with care. The coin is still there, now hidden from sight. Perhaps, in the myth she grew up hearing, Karen waits quietly at the shore, extending his hand. But whether or not the myth is real matters less than what it gave her, peace. The coin was more than payment. It was preparation. It was the knowledge that she would not be alone, that her journey had been planned for, even if it was a journey into darkness. And now, days later, her home is still. The fig tree still sways gently in the wind. The chickens still wander the yard. But her presence lingers in the small things, the neat stack of folded linens, the jar of olive oil by the window, the empty lamp. This was the experience of countless women across ancient Greece, lives of quiet repetition, domestic rhythm, and eventual decline. Their stories are not inscribed on monuments, but they live on in the archaeological traces of their lives. In loom weights, cooking pots, and yes, in coins found tucked gently in the mouths of skeletal remains. And though time has erased their names, their rituals remain. They are remembered not in grand histories, but in patterns. In customs. In the quiet continuity of belief. So next time you see a coin, round, metallic, cold to the touch, remember that in another world, in another time, it meant far more than currency. It meant comfort. It meant passage. It meant, perhaps, that someone had loved and prepared. As the rhythmic tides of life flowed through the ancient Greek world, its people marked transitions not only with practical arrangements, but also with carefully choreographed rituals. To live in ancient Greece was to be woven into a web of community, family, and gods, each event in one's life resonating not just personally but cosmically. Whether entering the world, pledging oneself in marriage, or departing life for the afterworld, there was a ritual to guide the way, a pathway smoothed by tradition and centuries of reverence. Let us begin gently with birth. In a modest home in the city of Corinth or the hills of Crete, a mother labored in dim light, surrounded by female relatives and possibly a midwife. There was no hospital, no sterile room. Just the familiar hum of women who had seen many births before, and the sacred presence of the goddess Eileithyia, the divine helper of childbirth, invoked in whispers and humble offerings. The act of giving birth was a moment of great risk and even greater reverence. After the infant's first cries echoed softly through the home, there was a sense of guarded celebration. The newborn was not immediately part of the household. Instead, the baby would spend its first few days in a liminal space between existence and acceptance. On the 5th or 7th day, depending on the region, the family held the amphidromia. During this quiet but important ceremony, the child would be carried around the household hearth, symbolically introduced to the ancestors, the household spirits, and the community of the living. Only after this moment did the child receive its name, a name often passed down through generations, echoing the past into the future. Life, now fully begun, would move forward steadily toward the next great passage, marriage. In ancient Athens, weddings were multi-day events, rich in symbolic gesture. Yet they were not lavish in the modern sense. Picture, instead, a dusklit gathering, where torches flicker gently and lyres murmur soft melodies under the evening sky. A girl's transition to womanhood was marked by quiet preparation. She would make offerings to Artemis, shedding her childhood toys as a sign that her girlhood was ending. Then came the bath, ritual and practical, followed by the donning of a simple yet elegant wedding garment, perhaps dyed saffron or adorned with a belt knotted in a sacred pattern. The wedding procession was a carefully orchestrated affair. As night fell, the bride was led from her father's house to her new home. She traveled on a cart or walked alongside it, accompanied by music, laughter, and the gentle gleam of torches. Along the way, grains were scattered, symbols of fertility. And songs were sung, both playful and reverent. When she arrived, she was greeted not only by her husband but by the hearth of her new family, a symbolic rebirth into another life. The wedding was a social contract, a joining of households, but also a sacred bond protected by the gods Hera and Zeus. In these rituals, there was no rush, no dramatic display, only the calm certainty of tradition, of belonging, of quiet joy. And then, one day, inevitably and unavoidably, came the final passage, death. We return now to the image from which this entire journey began, the placing of a coin into the mouth of the deceased. But before that quiet act, there were other steps, each imbued with care and spiritual weight. As soon as death occurred, the body was washed and anointed, usually by the women of the family. They worked in silence, their hands steady with practice and respect. The body was laid out, this was the prothesis. A vigil where mourners would come, not to speak loudly or wail dramatically as often dramatized, but to sit, to remember, to honor. Laurel branches and olive leaves might surround the body. Offerings of oil, small food items, or favorite belongings were set nearby. Then came the ekphora, the funeral procession, which took place just before dawn. This was a symbolic movement, not merely of the body, but of the soul. As the procession moved through the still, early morning streets or along a dusty rural road, there was no raucous weeping, only the gentle shuffling of feet, the occasional sound of flutes, and the solemn purpose of farewell. The burial itself was simple. Whether the deceased was placed in a pit grave, a stone-lined tomb, or cremated and buried in an urn, the essential act was always the same, the laying to rest of the physical vessel, and the hopeful escort of the soul to its next phase. A coin, small, round, and often modest, was placed under the tongue or in the mouth. It was not simply for Charon, the mythic ferryman. It was a token of safe passage, a symbol that the dead had not been forgotten, that their journey was known and prepared for. And afterward, the mourners returned to life. In the days and months following, rituals continued. The peridiapnon, or funeral feast, provided nourishment not just of the body, but of the heart. The tomb would be visited, often regularly, and libations of wine, milk, or honey poured onto the earth. Names were spoken, poems recited, and memories shared in soft voices around hearths and during festivals. Life in ancient Greece moved not in abrupt chapters but in circles, echoing the natural rhythms of growth, maturity, and rest. The rituals of birth, marriage, and death were not interruptions, they were the very threads that wove one generation into the next, quietly, reverently, and with a timeless grace. Now, as we prepare to move from these rituals of personal transformation, we will begin to explore something more elusive, more sacred still. In the next segment, we'll journey into the mysterious world of Greek temples, sacred spaces, and the silent language of offerings. We'll ask not only how the Greeks worshipped, but why, and what it felt like to kneel beneath the columns of Delphi, or to walk barefoot into the sanctuary of Eleusis. Let the soft candle of thought stay lit as we move forward, drifting deeper into their spiritual lives. As the hush of the Mediterranean dusk settles over the olive groves and marble colonnades of ancient Greece, imagine the world not of the living, but of the dead, and the living's constant, quiet conversation with them. In ancient Greek society, death did not mark a clean break from life. Instead, it signaled a transition, a passage into another realm, where the dead retained needs and identities. And as such, they required attention, honor, and, at times, material support. One of the most fascinating, and deeply cultural, aspects of this relationship was the idea of offerings made to the deceased. Coins in the mouth may have been the most iconic expression of this practice, but they were far from the only one. Let us begin with the broader tradition of funerary offerings, a set of customs rooted in reciprocity. The dead were honored with libations of wine and honey, with flowers, with foods, and yes, with small gifts of silver and bronze. In some cases, even personal possessions were buried alongside them, a beloved piece of pottery, a garment, a ring. These were not simply sentimental gestures. They were part of a sacred economy, a quiet, invisible transaction between the worlds of the living and the departed. In many regions of Greece, particularly Athens and the Ionian Islands, grave goods became standardized over time. Small ceramic vessels called lekithoi, often decorated with serene scenes of funerals or domestic life, were placed beside the body. Some held oil to anoint the deceased, others were symbolic, empty vessels meant to mark a passage now complete. But there were also tokens, small figurines, perfume bottles, even miniature tools, that may have served to equip the dead for their continued existence or served as symbolic stand-ins for offerings too grand or dangerous to bury. Coins, then, were part of this greater tapestry. Their placement in the mouth, or on the eyes or chest, was not always literal payment. In many contexts, especially in later periods, the coin may have represented a broader obligation, a way of ensuring that the deceased was not forgotten or neglected. To be buried without a coin could signify a poverty of care, a failure of duty. To be buried with one, even a humble piece of bronze, was a final act of familial piety. There is also the matter of the coin's material. In the early classical period, silver was the dominant medium. But as time progressed, we see a diversification, copper and bronze coins appearing in more humble graves, while silver and even gold coins were reserved for the wealthier or more ceremonially important burials. This variation speaks to another dimension of the sacred economy, status. Just as in life, status in death mattered. The burial practices of the elite often included more elaborate grave goods, multiple coins, and sometimes even inscriptions. In a few remarkable cases, entire burial hoards have been discovered, dozens of coins, clearly not just intended for caring, but perhaps representing a form of ancestral wealth or spiritual insurance. One particularly fascinating archaeological find, from a tomb in northern Greece, revealed a coin sewn into the shroud that had once wrapped the body. Not merely placed in the mouth, this coin had become part of the fabric of death itself. Another, in Boeotia, uncovered a silver drachma nestled in the palm of the deceased's hand, tightly curled fingers still clasping it after centuries. These small choices speak volumes, choices made by families, perhaps, or by the dying themselves. Yet the offerings were not limited to coins and tokens. In sanctuaries near graveyards, archaeologists have uncovered evidence of ritual meals, banquets for the dead, held in their honor. Families would gather, light small fires, and share food at the tomb site. Portions would be set aside, left on stone ledges or in shallow holes, for the deceased. This was a tradition with deep Indo-European roots, but it took on a uniquely Greek texture. It was not just an act of memory, but of relationship maintenance. The dead were considered capable of watching, listening, and even intervening in the world of the living. It was wise, then, to keep them pleased. And so the coin becomes not just a fairy toll, but a symbol of enduring care. A small disc of metal placed not out of fear, but out of affection. a gesture not of superstition, but of spiritual continuity. In placing the coin, the Greeks were not simply preparing the dead for a journey. They were reaffirming the bonds of family, the obligations of piety, and the quiet belief that death was not the end, only a new condition, one that still required remembrance and respect. As we begin to leave behind the realm of household rites and private gestures, let us turn our attention now to the grander side of the Greek relationship with death, where art, architecture, and legacy meet. In the next segment, we'll explore the magnificent funerary monuments of the elite, from towering steles to intricately carved sarcophagi. These were not merely graves, they were public statements of identity, virtue, and ambition, carved in marble and meant to outlast generations. Let us now walk slowly among them. As the sun rises slowly over the gentle slopes of ancient Attica or the hills of Thessaly, its golden light often catches on something striking: tall slabs of stone, elegantly carved, rising like sentinels above the resting places of the dead. These are the funerary monuments of ancient Greece, memorials of memory, artistry, and status. To stroll among them is to hear stories whispered not by voices, but by chisel marks. Unlike the subtle placement of a coin, these monuments were grand declarations. They stood in public view, along roadways leading into cities, or in designated cemeteries just outside the city walls, such as the famed Kerameikos in Athens. Here, amid cypress trees and low stone enclosures, one could walk among hundreds of gravestones, each one with its own style and story. Let's pause and consider the stele, the most iconic form of Greek grave marker. These upright slabs of marble varied from modest rectangles to elaborate sculptural reliefs. In the 5th and 4th centuries BCE, stele often portrayed the deceased in quiet, reflective scenes: a woman seated, holding a jewelry box, a young man clasping hands with his father, a child with a pet bird. These were not heroic portraits, but gentle depictions of everyday life, frozen eternally in quiet dignity. The artistry of these reliefs is often astounding. The folds of a chiton, the soft gaze of a mother, the outstretched hand of a parting gesture, all rendered with precision and empathy. The aim was not to show power, but character. These were people remembered not for conquest, but for who they were in their families and households. Inscriptions on these stele were equally restrained. A name, a patronymic, and perhaps a brief epitaph: Timorete, daughter of Philoxenos. Farewell. Or here lies Nicomachos, a good son, taken too soon. These simple words held weight. To be remembered at all was, in a way, to remain part of the community. For wealthier families, memorials became larger, even architectural. Mausoleums and chamber tombs began to appear, particularly in the Hellenistic period. These structures might feature columns, pediments, and intricate friezes. Inside, niches were carved into the stone to house urns or sarcophagi. Painted scenes once adorned many of these tombs. Now faded, but still detectable through careful archaeological work. And then there were the kouroi and korai, freestanding statues representing idealized youths. In earlier centuries, some were erected as grave markers, their rigid posture and blank expressions contrasting sharply with the realism that later art would embrace. Though not portraits in the modern sense, these statues evoke the prime of life, a life cut short, yet idealized in memory. Among the most famous of these grand memorials is the tomb of the Lacedaemonian, located near Amphipolis, which includes an elaborate stone lion standing atop a circular base. Another, near Piraeus, bears a sculpted battle scene, perhaps commemorating a soldier's valor. And in Vergina, the royal Macedonian tombs dazzle with painted frescoes and gold-laden artifacts, showing us how aristocratic burials were as much about dynasty as they were about the individual. Interestingly, the rise of monumental graves often coincided with periods of political change. During the democracy of classical Athens, for instance, there were moments when lavish burials were discouraged, an effort to promote equality even in death. laws were passed limiting the size of tombs, the cost of funeral feasts, and the display of wealth. Yet these laws were not always strictly enforced, and families often found quiet ways to express their pride and love. In rural areas and among more modest households, the grandeur of marble was replaced by simpler markers, unadorned stones, terracotta plaques, or even wooden stelae that have long since decayed. These too carried meaning, though they've left fewer traces behind. Still, their absence in the archaeological record reminds us that history, especially the history of ordinary people, is often built on what is missing. There's also a quiet drama to the changes in funerary art over time. In earlier centuries, the dead were depicted as individuals, self-contained, sometimes isolated. But by the Hellenistic period, scenes became more dynamic, families gathered, emotions visible, even depictions of mythological journeys into the underworld. The influence of Eastern art and the spread of Greek culture through Alexander's conquests brought new themes into play: winged spirits, boats on dark rivers, and reunions beyond the grave. In this way, a cemetery was not a static place, but a living reflection of cultural change. Each monument, each relief, each inscription whispered something about how the Greeks viewed life, death, and what lay beyond. And so, with the image of marble stele standing in the morning light, silent, watchful, and full of quiet dignity, we move closer to understanding not just how the Greeks buried their dead, but how they remembered them. In our next segment, we will leave behind the tombstones and descend deeper into myth itself. For beneath every cultural custom lies a story, and nowhere are the Greeks more rich or imaginative than in their tales of the underworld. Join us as we follow the shadowy paths of Hades, Persephone, and the judgment of souls, where death becomes not an end, but a realm unto itself. Let's now drift deeper, beyond the tactile rituals of grave preparation, past the flickering hearths of family mourning, into the murky, metaphysical waters where the Greek imagination placed its hopes and fears. The soul, or psyche, once separated from the body, did not simply vanish or ascend. It began a voyage. A literal, imagined journey through a landscape of shadow and silence, a realm neither here nor fully elsewhere. The Greeks believed that the soul had to make its way to the underworld, Hades, and that this journey had rules, customs, and challenges. It was not merely a drift into nothingness. It was an odyssey. According to classical texts, especially those shaped during the archaic and classical periods of Greece, the underworld was guarded and defined by 5 rivers. Each river served a specific purpose, each represented a different psychological or existential challenge. These rivers were not mere water but personified thresholds, barriers the soul would pass, dissolve into, or be defined by. The first and most frequently mentioned was the river Styx. Styx meant hate or abhorrence. It marked the boundary between the world of the living and that of the dead. It was said that even the gods themselves respected the power of this river. Oaths sworn upon the Styx were binding even for the immortals. For the dead, crossing the Styx was a sacred passage, an irreversible crossing from which no soul could return unless granted divine exception. Then came Akron, the river of woe. This river was often depicted as the one actually ferried across by Charon, and it is to Akron that many tomb inscriptions refer. It was here, they believed, that the newly dead wept, not only for their lives left behind but also for the long shadow ahead. Some Greek poets considered Akron as not just a river, but the actual entrance to Hades, a sorrowful gash in the earth through which souls trickled like leaves in a cold current. There was also Lethe, the river of forgetfulness. A strange, troubling concept, even to us now. According to some traditions, drinking from Lethe would cause the soul to forget its earthly life, a gentle erasure that made it possible to dwell among the dead without grief. The idea of memory itself being a burden, something one must relinquish to attain peace, reveals how nuanced the Greek vision of the soul was. To truly belong in death, one must first let go of life. Phlegethon, the river of fire, introduced yet another layer. It was described as a stream of burning flame, moving without consuming, an image full of paradox. This was a place of purification, perhaps, or punishment, depending on the life one had led. Some Greek thinkers, especially later philosophers, would associate phlegethon with the cleansing of sins or spiritual impurity. And finally, Cocytus, the river of lamentation. Its very name carries the sound of wailing, kokitos, the cry, the sob. This was a river of perpetual mourning. The souls that failed to receive proper burial, those denied the coin or the rites, might be condemned to linger near its banks. Here, they might wander without hope, echoing their grief endlessly into the dark. These rivers were more than topography for the ancient Greeks. They were psychological metaphors, emotional maps of the soul's transition from life to death. To stand at the banks of Lethe was to confront the pain of memory. To hear the rush of Akron was to accept the sorrow of goodbye. To cross the Styx was to embrace a new identity, no longer a person of breath and warmth, but something quieter, softer, thinner. It's no wonder, then, that the rituals surrounding death were so thorough. They weren't merely to honor the dead, they were to assist them, to guide them. The coin in the mouth, the carefully arranged body, the clean shroud, the wailing, the offerings, all were part of the preparation for this final, silent journey. Each act on the part of the living was intended to make the soul's navigation smoother, more dignified, and perhaps less lonely. The ancient texts rarely describe the underworld in vivid detail. It is often left vague, shadowy, and indistinct. But the presence of these rivers suggests that the Greeks imagined death as neither a single moment nor a static state. It was a progression, a liminal unfolding of experience, where the soul slowly shed its attachments, its fears, its identity, and stepped into something timeless. Imagine yourself drifting gently, boatless, but carried. You float past the hiss of phlegethon, feel the weight of memory loosening near Lethe. The cries along Cocytus call to your empathy, and as you near Akron, you sense something old and quiet watching, waiting to receive you. And perhaps now you understand why a single coin could hold such meaning. It was not just payment, it was hope, comfort, permission to move forward. It was a token that said, you are not forgotten. Your journey is seen. Your passage, honored. Let us now follow that passage further, not just through rivers and shadows, but into the spaces where the living and the dead occasionally met. Where memories lingered, and where the boundaries of the worlds thinned just enough for something sacred to pass between. As the ancient Greek soul drifted ever deeper into the misted landscape of the underworld, the world of the living did not simply forget. On the contrary, a vast and enduring relationship remained between those above the earth and those who lay beneath it. To the ancient Greeks, death did not break all bonds, it only transformed them. Across city-states, generations, and regions, Greeks engaged in practices of remembrance, ceremonial, emotional, and deeply symbolic. These were not merely traditions for comfort. They were bridges. Lifelines sent downward into the gloom, offering light, warmth, and connection to those who had crossed over. One of the most important and enduring of these traditions was the annual Genesia, a festival of the dead. Held in late September, it was a time when families cleaned and decorated graves, offered libations, and sometimes dined near tombs in honor of their ancestors. It wasn't a moment of fear but a familial presence. It was about showing continued respect, ensuring that no soul slipped into obscurity. You might imagine it as the Greek version of All Souls' Day or Dia de los Muertos, gentler than funerals, but just as vital in meaning. There were also individual rites. Offerings, or choai, were regularly poured into the earth, mixtures of wine, honey, milk, or water. These libations fed the spirits, kept them calm, and were often poured during both formal ceremonies and moments of private grief. In some cases, people left food or small tokens at the grave, believing that the dead, though invisible, retained a kind of consciousness, a ghostly sense of presence that could feel respect or neglect. The grave itself was more than a burial place. It was a house of memory. Tombs were often marked by steely, tall stone markers engraved with the name and image of the deceased. Many of these show moving scenes, a father reaching toward a son, a young woman holding a dove, a soldier resting one hand on his shield. These were not just decorations, they were narrative fragments meant to anchor the memory of a life lived, a person loved. In Athens, public commemoration reached its most formal level in the Demozion Sema, the state cemetery for fallen warriors. Here, the city itself participated in remembrance. Citizens gathered to hear funeral orations, like the famous one attributed to Pericles, which not only mourned the dead but celebrated their virtues, immortalizing them in speech. This wasn't just a personal loss, it was a collective reckoning with the cost of existence and the value of courage. The Greeks also practiced more personal forms of spiritual contact. In certain regions and periods, particularly influenced by mystery religions like those of Orpheus and Dionysus, people sought to communicate with the dead. Through rituals, dreams, or oracles of the dead, nekiomanteia, they believed it was possible, rarely, and only with effort, to speak across the veil. In the Homeric tradition, Odysseus's visit to the underworld in the Odyssey is one such moment. He digs a trench, pours sacrificial blood, and calls forth the spirits. They speak to him, not in riddles but in recognizable voices. Some warn him. Some weep. Some simply ask to be remembered. This idea, that the dead want to be remembered, is one that ran deep. The worst fate, in many Greek minds, was not punishment in Hades but being forgotten. To drift alone in the mists without a name, without offerings, without a single living soul to call you to mind, that was the true death. Lethe was not just a river, it was a metaphor for being lost to time. To combat this, even ordinary citizens would commission grave reliefs, write poems of mourning, and pass stories from one generation to the next. Names were given to grandchildren to keep ancestors close. Myth and memory intertwined. It's why so many ancient Greek plays are filled with ghosts, ancestors, and warnings from beyond. The dead were not gone. They watched, waited, and sometimes spoke. There were also darker expressions of this ongoing connection. Some Greeks feared restless spirits, those who died violently, unjustly, or without burial. These ataphoi, the unburied, might linger as shades, whispering misfortune or disturbing the living. To appease them, people would sometimes perform mock burials, offer posthumous honors, or build shrines at crossroads where such spirits were believed to gather. Even tombs were sometimes constructed with small holes, called psychomantia, through which libations could be poured, or even soft words spoken to the soul below. These openings weren't architectural accidents. They were portals. Doorways through which emotion could travel, reminding the dead, you are still part of us. You are still loved. Some of the most touching archaeological finds are small inscriptions etched in pots or offerings, short lines like, "To my mother, I miss you," or "May you rest gently." These are not the grand speeches of generals or poets. They are the quiet voices of everyday grief. And they endure. In the end, the ancient Greeks understood something timeless, that memory is a kind of immortality. That to speak a name, to light a fire, to pour a little wine into the earth is to resist the silence of death. Not to defeat it, but to share something human with those who have gone before. So the next time you see an old grave, an ancient name carved into stone, remember that the impulse to remember, so central to Greek culture, is still with us. It lives in our rituals, our stories, our longing not to forget. Now, let us follow the path even further, not into mourning, but into meaning. In the next segment, we will explore how myth and heroism reshaped the afterlife in the Greek imagination. Because in some tellings, the dead did more than sleep. They lived again, in stories, in honor, in myth. As we continue drifting along the gentle river of time, let us now take a slower, more analytical turn into the economic realities that made the practice of burying coins with the dead not just symbolic, but financially and socially significant. It's a side of the story less spiritual and more grounded in the material workings of ancient Greek life. Close your eyes and imagine the smooth surface of an ancient Greek coin, a drachma, perhaps, cool to the touch, with the face of Athena etched in profile, her owl companion on the reverse. That tiny disk of metal carried weight, not just in your palm, but in your social standing, your ability to eat, to travel, to participate in civic life. And, as we've seen, even in your final departure from the world. In classical Athens, coinage had become an essential instrument of daily exchange. Unlike earlier barter systems, coin currency allowed for more efficient trade and taxation. But more than that, it became a marker of civilization, of order, stability, and identity. Every coin bore symbols of the city-state that minted it, as if each coin carried a small, glittering proclamation of political pride. When we look at burial practices, this economic significance becomes all the more clear. The coin placed in the mouth was not merely a token, it was currency, one that retained its value even in death. Some scholars argue that this wasn't just about the symbolic toll for Charon, but also a continuation of the deceased's economic agency. By sending a coin with them, families acknowledged that commerce didn't entirely stop with life. Perhaps they believed that just as the living needed money to move through the world, the dead might need it to pass into the next. And this, in turn, reflected a society where value, trade, and economy were central not just to the living world, but to their spiritual and ritual understanding of the afterlife. There is another layer here, too. One that reflects both compassion and social awareness. The presence of a coin in the mouth of the deceased was sometimes a matter of dignity. To die and be buried without a coin could imply that one's family was too poor to offer even the minimum for your journey to the afterlife. In a society where reputation, legacy, and the continuation of honor through descendants mattered greatly, ensuring that even a modest coin accompanied the dead became a small but essential act of care. And so, from an economic perspective, the coin was far more than a mere talisman, it was a form of posthumous respect. It represented an investment in the soul's journey, an echo of the same economy that shaped temples, funded plays, and built ships for war and exploration. Coinage itself, after all, wasn't just money, it was art, identity, and expression. Different polis minted their own designs. Corinth preferred Pegasus, while Athens clung to Athena and her owl. Each coin that ended up in the mouth of the dead carried not just purchasing power, but the emblem of their home, a final reminder of where they came from and to whom they belonged. Interestingly, coins placed with the dead were sometimes pierced or folded, rendering them unusable in earthly trade. Was this symbolic? Possibly. Perhaps it reflected an offering now outside the bounds of the living economy, devoted entirely to the dead, not to be confused with the coins of the marketplace. There is a calm, almost meditative beauty in this act. One imagines a family gathering around, choosing the coin with quiet reverence. Perhaps they selected one from a particular year, or one minted during a significant event. Maybe it was the same kind of coin the deceased once used to buy bread or wine. Now, it would go with them, tucked beneath their tongue, destined for a mythic river crossing. And then there is the quiet implication that coinage offered continuity. Life, afterlife, and the lives of those left behind were all tied together through this simple, circular token. The same type of coin might pass through the hands of a merchant in Athens, a widow in Thebes, and eventually a funeral director preparing a body for burial. In that way, each coin was a witness to life's cycle, from birth to death, from the agora to the underworld. As we gently transition away from this economic reflection, let the metallic clink of ancient coins echo softly in your mind, not loud or jarring, but rhythmic and steady, like a lullaby in metal tones. They remind us that even in death, the systems of value, honor, and exchange held firm, offering structure and reassurance to those facing the great unknown. In the next segment, we will turn our attention to a curious variation. What happened when this custom was challenged, forbidden, or forgotten? What do we learn from the rare burials without coins, and the implications of a soul left to wander without fare? As we drift even deeper into the gentle currents of history, let us explore the haunting silence left behind when no coin was placed in the mouth of the deceased. What became of the souls who were buried without this sacred fare? Were they truly doomed to wander the misty banks of the river Akron, calling out for Charon's ferry in vain? Or is there more nuance to this omission, social, economic, and cultural, that invites a deeper reflection? In ancient Greek tradition, particularly during the classical and Hellenistic periods, the placement of a coin was expected, almost ritualized. And yet, not every grave contains one. In fact, archaeological findings tell a varied story. Some burials are accompanied by coins, while others are not. Why? Let's begin with the most practical explanation: poverty. Not every family could afford the luxury of a coin. Even something as simple as a low-value bronze piece may have been out of reach for those on the margins of society. These were people who lived day to day, struggling to feed their children or maintain a modest home. For them, the symbolic coin might have been viewed as a luxury they could not afford. In this context, the absence of a coin is not a reflection of spiritual neglect, but of a painful economic reality. And then, there is age. Infant burials, for example, often lack coins. Perhaps it was thought that a child's soul would not need to cross the same perilous threshold as an adult, or maybe the ritual was reserved only for those who had lived long enough to warrant a formal passage. This reveals a quieter belief, one not written in marble or scroll, but reflected in tender burials where care was present, but the coin was not. Religious variation also played a role. While the myth of Charon was widespread, it was not universal. Some Greek regions or city-states may have observed different rites, influenced by local cults or evolving philosophical views about the soul and its journey. In these areas, a coin might not have been seen as necessary, or even appropriate. During periods of war or plague, when death came rapidly and often, funerary customs could be rushed or abandoned altogether. Mass graves and emergency cremations were not uncommon, and the coin for Charon tradition may have simply been forgotten or deprioritized in times of crisis. The silence of those burials, the absence of ritual, speaks volumes about societal upheaval and the struggle to maintain dignity amid chaos. There are even literary hints at the consequences of a coinless death. In some later interpretations of the myth, souls without fare would be left to wait 100 years on the banks of the river, unseen and unheard by the living world, longing for passage. Whether this was taken literally or figuratively, the idea left a powerful impression on ancient minds. To die unprepared, without a coin, was to risk spiritual delay, a liminal stasis that no one wished upon their loved ones. Yet, over time, Greek attitudes toward death evolved. Philosophers like Socrates, Plato, and later the Stoics began to shift focus away from physical rites and toward the purity of the soul. To them, the condition of the spirit mattered far more than the presence of a token in the mouth. The coin remained important to many, but new voices began to challenge the necessity of such material symbols. It's also worth noting that some burials may have once contained coins, but time and decay have erased their presence. Bronze corrodes. Soil shifts. Archaeology is not always able to reconstruct the full reality of ancient funerals. A missing coin in a grave doesn't always mean it was never there. Still, there is something achingly poetic about imagining those lonely souls, real or imagined, left without a fare. Whether due to poverty, chaos, or forgetfulness, their quiet journey into the underworld becomes a gentle echo, reminding us that memory and ritual are fragile and often incomplete. But perhaps the most comforting thought is this: even when the coin was missing, love often wasn't. We find other tokens in these graves: flowers, simple jewelry, a toy placed beside a child. These too were gestures of care, of grief, of connection. The coin may have been the most formal offering, but it wasn't the only one. So, in the hush of this segment, we are left with a soft awareness that death, in all ages, brings with it uncertainty and imperfection. And yet, in the spaces where coins are absent, other forms of tenderness emerge. In the next segment, we will explore how this ritual echoed through time, not only among the Greeks, but as it rippled outward into Roman practices, and even modern echoes of coins placed with the dead. As we continue our calm descent into the layers of time, we find ourselves drifting from the marble columns of classical Greece to the sprawling cities of the Roman world. And here, along these Roman roads lined with tombs, the tradition of placing coins with the dead did not vanish. Rather, it transformed, absorbing new meanings, adapting to new religions, and crossing into broader territories. When the Romans inherited much of Greek cultural tradition, they also adopted its myths and funerary rites. The idea of Charon, the ferryman of the underworld, was embraced almost seamlessly. Roman poets, especially Virgil and later Ovid, helped cement this imagery into Roman consciousness. In the Aeneid, Virgil describes Aeneas encountering Charon at the river, waiting to ferry the souls of the dead who had received proper rites. Those who hadn't? They were doomed to wait, just as in the Greek version. But the Romans, ever practical and methodical, gave the tradition their own flavor. The coin placed with the dead was often referred to as the obolus, just as it had been in Greece, or sometimes as a dannic. But in Roman contexts, the more common term became the Charon's obol, often rendered in Latin as obolus charontis. The placement also shifted slightly. While the Greeks often placed the coin in the mouth, the Romans sometimes laid it on the tongue, the eye, or inside the clenched hand. The symbolism remained intact. It was payment for passage, but the ritual began to evolve in its physical form. Roman burial sites, such as those found in Pompeii, Herculaneum, or the necropolises outside the city of Rome, often yield coins placed deliberately with the deceased. And sometimes more than one, perhaps as a safeguard, or as an offering to multiple deities involved in the journey. Roman beliefs blended older Greek views with newer, localized ideas about death. It was not uncommon to find inscriptions calling upon Dis Pater or Proserpina, Roman equivalents of Hades and Persephone. As Roman religion evolved and came into contact with Egyptian beliefs, the fusion of Charon with local underworld figures became more complex. In some Egyptian Roman funerary rites, coins were found alongside mummified remains, nestled among amulets and wrapped within linens. Here, the coin was one of many protective tools for navigating the afterlife. And then, with the rise of Christianity in the Roman Empire, the tradition began to shift once more. Early Christians did not initially embrace the coin custom. The theological focus moved away from mythological river crossings and towards salvation, resurrection, and spiritual judgment. The image of Charon became less relevant, replaced by angelic guides or divine light. Yet old habits often linger. In rural areas, even as late as the 4th and 5th centuries CE, coins were still found in Christian burials. Some historians believe these may have been cultural holdovers, blending traditional Roman practice with newer Christian ideals, offered not to Charon, but as general tokens of goodwill, or perhaps simply for the sake of tradition. By the Middle Ages, the overt symbolism of Charon's fair had largely faded, but echoes remained. Coins were still occasionally buried with the dead, especially among nobility. Sometimes these coins bore the image of the ruler, functioning both as tokens of value and as symbols of earthly authority carried into the next world. In Northern Europe, folk traditions emerged where coins were placed on the eyes of the dead, not necessarily as fare, but as a practical and symbolic act. The weight of the coins helped keep the eyes closed, but they also served as a final earthly gift, a gesture of respect. In this small way, the ancient practice quietly echoed down through time. Even today, there are customs around the world that seem to faintly remember the old ritual. In some cultures, coins are still placed in coffins, or offered at graves during anniversaries. While the myth of care and may no longer guide these gestures, the impulse to provide, to prepare, and to symbolically assist the dead remains remarkably persistent. And in literature, film, and art, Charon's shadow continues to appear, guiding heroes, confronting souls, or ferrying the forgotten. He has become more than a myth, he is a metaphor for all our transitions, all our endings, all our farewells. As we prepare to enter our next segment, we will turn our attention to Charon himself, not just as a ferryman, but as a figure of myth, of fear, of fate. Who was this silent oarsman? What stories did the ancients tell about him? What did it mean to encounter him, even in dreams or visions? Let us now gently push away from the stone-lined banks of history and float quietly toward the figure at the heart of this ancient rite, Charon himself. The ferryman. The silent guide. The one who waits in the shadows of myth, his boat bobbing upon the dark waters of the underworld. Charon first appears in Greek literature around the 5th century BCE, though the notion of a ferryman of souls likely predates even this. In early sources, he is not deeply described, he is more presence than person. A necessary figure in the great machinery of death. He exists because someone must guide the soul across the river. Someone must take the coin. Someone must row. In most traditions, Charon rows across the river Styx or the river Akron, rivers of forgetfulness, pain, and shadow. These rivers are metaphors, of course, but also believed to be very real in the minds of ancient peoples. They lay beneath the surface of the earth, dividing the world of the living from the realm of the dead. And Charon's role was fixed and eternal, to ferry only those who had been properly buried, who carried with them the fare, and whose souls were permitted to cross. He is rarely described in great detail, but when he is, the descriptions are striking. Virgil called him a sordid god with unkempt beard, whose eyes burned like fire. Dante, much later in the Divine Comedy, imagined him as an old man with white hair, angrily herding souls onto his boat with a beating oar. Others imagined him younger, more grim, his clothing tattered, his voice seldom heard. But Charon is never cruel. He is stern, yes. Impassive. Unbending in his rules. But his duty is not malevolent. He simply fulfills a role. He does not judge, he transports. He does not torment, he guides. His power lies in his neutrality, his consistency, his inevitability. For this reason, Charon became more than a character. He became a symbol. To the Greeks, he represented the boundary between life and death. A moment of transition, irreversible and solemn. The coin he collected was a token of this transaction, a symbolic acknowledgement that a soul was moving from one realm to another, and that the journey required respect, preparation, and ceremony. To others, Charon came to embody the fear of being forgotten. Those who were unburied, who had no coin, were left to wander the shores of the river for eternity. And so, the myth of Charon encouraged remembrance. It urged the living to care for the dead, to honor them properly, lest they be left alone in the mist. In Roman art, Charon sometimes appears on sarcophagi or in painted tombs, his boat emerging from swirling water, his pole extended to welcome the deceased. In these images, he is both grim and comforting. A reminder that even in death, there is process. There is order. There is someone waiting to guide you. In modern times, the image of Charon has persisted far beyond ancient religion. In literature, he often appears in dreams, visions, or symbolic journeys, especially those involving death, grief, or transformation. Poets and storytellers evoke his presence when they speak of the passage from one state of being to another. A quiet boat, a dark river, a lone figure with a pole. He has even entered science. When astronomers discovered Pluto's largest moon in 1978, they named it Charon, honoring the mythological ferryman who traveled near the planet of the dead. It was a fitting name, a poetic gesture, tying mythology to the vast unknown of the cosmos. And so, Charon lives on, not just as a myth, but as a motif. He stands in for all our crossings, all our endings, all our silent passages into the unknown. He reminds us that death is not chaos, but transition. That there are rituals, even in the darkness. That we do not travel alone. In the final segment of our journey, we will reflect on the deeper meanings behind these ancient practices. What does it say about us, that for thousands of years we placed coins on the eyes, in the mouths, or in the hands of the dead? What remains of these beliefs in our modern world? What do they whisper to us as we drift towards sleep? As our journey through this ancient ritual draws to a close, let us rest now in the soft hush of reflection, much like a soul adrift on a quiet river under a twilight sky. The tale of Charon's coin is not merely a curious relic of Greek mythology. It is something deeper, something profoundly human. It is a whisper from the past about how we have always coped with the great mystery of death. When we examine these burial rites, from the carefully placed coins beneath the tongue to the intricate myths of ferrymen and rivers, we see more than superstition. We see structure, meaning, love. The Greeks believed that the soul was not simply extinguished upon death. It had somewhere to go, a destination, and that journey required care. Just as one might prepare a loved one for a long voyage across the sea, the dead were sent off with tools, tokens, and rituals. A coin, a word of prayer, a gentle touch on the brow. These small gestures whispered to the dead, "You are not forgotten. You are guided. You are honored." The coin, so simple and small, became a mighty symbol. It was not just a payment, it was a passage, a safeguard, a promise that one's spirit would not be left behind. For in Greek belief, the greatest tragedy was not death, it was being unburied, unmoored, wandering endlessly on the banks of the river, watching others cross, but never boarding the boat yourself. This fear, the fear of being lost, of being unmourned, echoes through time. Even today, in our modern funeral rites, we often see fragments of these ancient ideas. Flowers placed gently on a coffin, a photograph tucked into a casket, a prayer spoken aloud. These are our coins, our offerings to the unseen, our hope that there is still a journey beyond the veil. And though the name Charon may no longer be spoken at gravesides, his presence endures. He lives in our metaphors, in our poetry, in our quiet need to believe that death is not chaos but transition. That someone waits to carry us gently from one shore to another. Psychologists and anthropologists who study grief often note that rituals bring comfort because they restore a sense of control in a time of loss. But perhaps there's more to it than that. Perhaps rituals like Charon's coin also help the living remember how deeply connected we are, not just to each other, but to something older, something eternal. To give a coin to the dead is to admit that we do not know what lies beyond. But it is also to declare that we care enough to prepare them for it. It is to love across the boundaries of life and death. It is to believe that a journey continues, even if we cannot follow. And so, As we close this quiet exploration, let us carry with us the stillness of that river, the soft splash of an oar in the dark, and the glint of a single coin resting gently on closed eyes. Let us remember that for thousands of years, humanity has faced the unknown not with silence, but with stories, with symbols, with the enduring belief that we are not alone. Thank you for joining us on this voyage through myth and memory. May your sleep be peaceful, your dreams gentle, and your thoughts touched by the ancient hush of history. Good night, traveler.